Preocupado el presidente anaranjado, viendo que las elecciones las perdió.
Solicita a los que le hacen los mandados que se apuren pues la fiesta terminó.
Y mirando que se va a acabar el varo,
han formado un titingo. Se han negado a abandonar la Casa Blanca, a la silla del despacho se amarró.
Los pelitos que le quedan los arranca, pataleando por la rabia que le dio.
Y mirando a Cuba con sus batas blancas, de cabeza se tiró.
El que tenga confusión que se confunda, el que quiera claridad que venga a ver.
La jugada no es compleja ni profunda, está claro cómo quieren proceder.
Solo falta que nosotros los dejemos,
y eso no va a suceder.
Con la conga de los hoyos no te metas.
Cuba viva sin que nadie la someta. Mi tierra linda, mi cubanía, mi bandera se respeta. De La Habana para Santiago, defiende lo tuyo, cubano.
que no te metas con mi tierra, que mi Cuba se respeta.
Soy el mambí que aún vive con el machete en la mano. No, 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 no. ¿Qué me importa si comentas?
De donde vengo yo, estamos listos para la contienda. Aguanta ahí, pero dime tú, ¿pa' qué tú inventas?
Con mi pueblo guarachando, yo vine aquí para cantar. Toda Cuba está esperando que yo la ponga a gozar.
Aquí nadie tiene miedo, tú conmigo no te metas. Oh, no. ¡Hey! Oye, soquetón, mi alegría te molesta.
Porque tú me conoces bien en todas mis facetas. Que no tenemos miedo, sal de ahí, no abra esa gaveta.
What we believe we are doing at this time is giving a new opportunity to our people, bringing human rights to the vast majority of the people who have never had any human rights, who never knew where it was to press a button to get electricity, as you no doubt can do in your house, who never knew what it was like to put a tap on and see pipe-borne water flowing through that tap, who never knew what it was like to get free health care as we now give, who never knew what it was like to provide free education as we now provide, who never knew what jobs were like. They were 49% unemployed before the revolution. Today that is 12% unemployed, 37% reduced over 4 years. That is what the people of Grenada today regard as freedom. So far as your non-aligned part of the question is concerned, again, I think you are really grossly mistaken as to the true meaning of non-alignment. Non-alignment to us, in essence, really has to do with diversification, really has to do with the expansion of your relations, really has to do with recognizing that the world is not just west or east, but that the world is west, it is east, it is north, it is south. And therefore the importance of developing relations with as many countries around the world as you possibly can. That is a right that the people of America have reserved for themselves, it is also a right that the people of the third world, like Grenada, also have for themselves.
Welcome, comrades. Greetings, greetings, greetings. This is the National Network on Cuba's Revolution Within the Revolution podcast. My name is Onya Sanwu Chatoye. I am one of your hosts. I'm also one of the 5 elected co-chairs of the National Network on Cuba and an organizer with the May Day Brigade. And I'm joined by my comrade, Ermia. What's up, Ermia?
Hello, comrades. Hello, Onya. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's show. My name is Ermia. I'm an organizer with the Action for Cuba Committees and the National Network on Cuba, and I live in Washington, D.C., the heart of the belly of the beast. And we are very, very excited to have y'all join us today to give y'all some geopolitical updates and to hear from compas on the May Day Brigade. So thank you, and please join us every single Friday. We will be here the same time next week as well.
100%. Thank you, Ermia, my wonderful co-host. We've been doing this show together for a couple of months. It's been great. If you like this show, if you want to help us build our audience, if you want to help us get the truth out about Cuba, about the Cuban Revolution, and to build the Cuba Solidarity Movement, not just in the US, but all over the world, then hit that like button, share this stream, subscribe to the National Network on Cuba YouTube channel so that we can build our audience, so we can get this message in front of the people that need to hear it, that are going to build upon it. Also, we just saw a clip of a very handsome man. Perhaps you recognized him, perhaps you didn't. It's okay if you didn't, but enjoy the face. However, that very handsome man was Maurice Bishop, revolutionary hero, leader of the Nul Jewel movement in Grenada, leader of the Revolutionary People's Government in Grenada, until an extremely ill-advised coup by ultra-leftist forces in Grenada that led to his assassination in 1983, and then an invasion and occupation by the US military shortly after. Grenada built a revolutionary socialist project under the Nul Jewel movement that improved the material conditions of the masses of African people living on the island, that also built ties, principled internationalist ties with other revolutionary socialist projects in the region and the world, including the Cuban Revolution. And in fact, when the US government invaded and occupied Grenada, shortly after the overthrow and assassination of Maurice Bishop, there were many Cubans that died fighting on that island, trying to resist that occupation. And so there is a long history of friendship between the people of Grenada and the people of Cuba, a long history of shared resistance to capitalism and imperialism, and also a long history of internal repression and external destabilization and military threats as well, unfortunately. So we wanted to uplift that comrade on this day. His birthday, he was born May 29th, 1944. It is also someone else's birthday. It's Gemini season, baby. Happy birthday, Ermia. Yes.
Thank you, comrades, and thank you, comrades. Your girl turns 26 today, and inshallah, 26 more years struggling alongside all of you. So thank you. Yeah, your girl feels old. It's crazy. I've been on this planet for 26 years. Wild.
I'm 40 years old.
I would not have guessed that, Comrade Onya. I would not have guessed that.
While you are a very strong and principled revolutionary, it is remarkable to see how politically clear and militant and disciplined you are at 26. I'm going to get tighter and better and better and better. So grateful that we are organizing together, that we're doing this show together. And happy birthday, comrade. We celebrate you today.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you.
Also, if you want to know more about Maurice Bishop, the Nul Jewel movement, and the revolutionary movement in Grenada that was destroyed by US intervention, I highly recommend this documentary. It's called The Future Coming Towards Us, and you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. I have to type. So 1 second. The Future Coming Towards Us, and then link. So that movie is in the chat. Please check it out if you want to know more about Maurice Bishop and the Nul Jewel movement. It's up on YouTube for free. And yeah, happy birthday, Ermia. We appreciate you just to keep it moving, because we do have a packed show, like the comrade shared. We got some updates on the International War on Cuba campaign. We got some geopolitical updates. The counter-revolution is popping off, but the resistance is as well. We're getting into all of it, but we would be remiss if we did not say that the democratically elected president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and the First Lady of Venezuela, Celia Flores, are still being held on completely made-up charges in solitary detention in the Manhattan Detention Center in New York City. They were kidnapped by the US government in so-called Operation Absolute Resolve, the invasion of Caracas, the murder of 100 people, including 32 Cuban comrades who fought bravely to defend the Bolivarian Revolution. They beat the hell out of Celia Flores, and then they kidnapped Celia Flores, Nicolas Maduro, and brought them to the United States to face a trial for completely made up charges. When I say completely made up, they straight up made up a criminal organization and said that Nicolas Maduro led it. Like, they weren't even trying. They were not even trying to tell the truth. So that is still happening. They've been held for over 5 months. It's going to be exactly 5 months this coming Wednesday, June 3rd, which is also the International Day of Action for No War on Cuba. And so we have to see like the tight alignment between the struggles against imperialism that are ongoing in Venezuela and led by the PSUV, as well as the struggle to resist imperialism in Cuba. Like, these are directly connected struggles. And that's why we keep uplifting Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores, because once the United States attacked Venezuela, deposed its president, gained control of Venezuela's oil supply, they intentionally cut off Cuba from that resource. They moved to cut off the rest of Cuba's oil, and they've kept escalating and escalating and escalating the suffering of the Cuban people to attempt to pressure Cuba into submitting. So like, without the military invasion of Venezuela, without the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores, we would not be able to see the U.S. carrying out the total oil blockade of Cuba. Like, the fall of Venezuela was instrumental to carrying out this policy. They are directly connected. So that's that. We want free Nicolas Maduro. We want free Celia Flores. And then lastly, in our opening, we want to talk about what happened this day in Cuban history. This day in Cuban history. Hold on, let me get the notes. So today in Cuban history, we see the imperialist weaponization of illegalism through Franklin D. Roosevelt as part of his good neighbor policy, and continuation of Teddy Roosevelt's imperialist and neocolonism by other means agenda of enforcing the Monroe Doctrine on the rest of the hemisphere. Cuba and the United States, a puppet government in Cuba, signed what's known as the Treaty of Relations, which is basically concretizing the neocolonial relationship between Cuba and the United States, as led by the United States. It was a Trojan horse for economic domination, surveillance, and support for friendly US-backed dictators that would repress the Cuban people in the interests of the United States. And so we have to understand this Treaty of Relations was not something that Cuba was signing of its own regard. It was something that they were pressured into signing by the United States to make sure that US interests could be represented on the island, so that a military occupation of the island could be initiated in Guantanamo Bay, and so that Cuba's economy, its state, its government could be organized around US interests. So it was not a treaty signed between equals. It was a treaty signed between a neocolonial government and an imperialist power. So that's what happened on this day, on May 29th in Cuban history. And the last thing we'll say, because you're probably thinking about it, is we are aware of the Fox News story that came out claiming that the National Network on Cuba and other Cuba solidarity forces in the United States are under investigation by the feds. They were saying all kinds of things. They were saying we were taking leftists to Cuba to be indoctrinated. They were saying that we're taking our direction from the Cuban government. They're saying, just making up all kinds of things. And we do not care. We don't care. We are going to continue to organize our No War on Cuba campaign. We are going to continue to organize the Centennial Fidel Brigade. We are not going to allow ourselves to be distracted by lies coming from what is essentially state media in the form of Fox News. Like, they have done this before. There is a long history of media warfare targeting the Cuban Revolution, targeting Cuban people, and targeting Cuba solidarity forces. And it always happens for the same reason: to attempt to divide us, to attempt to isolate us, and to attempt to distract us from the ultimate objective of ending US war against Cuba and ending the blockade. So it's happened before, it's going to happen again. It's a bunch of nonsense, can't stop, won't stop. But we do have an interview with Belly of the Beast, done by our comrades at Code Pink, specifically addressing the allegations, why they're nonsense, and what the real focus needs to be. And we'll play that later on in the show. And that can just serve as, if you want to know what our position is, just listen to Code Pink. But we're going to move into the No War on Cuba updates, starting with some geopolitical updates from around the world, and then some No War on Cuba global campaign updates from Armia. So I'm going to let our comrade chill, and then I'm going to take it away and pass it. Happy birthday.
Hi, comrades.
Okay. So what's going on in the world? Some really important news that is, as usual, being under discussed in US media is the revelation of what's being called Honduras Gate. Honduras Gate. And I just dropped a link in the chat to an investigation that was conducted by Progressive International. Like, they have this investigation platform called Reactionary International, where they do deep dives into different reactionary forces and how they're moving and collaborating around the world. And so the Progressive International Reactionary International Project did this analysis of Honduras Gate. And essentially what Honduras Gate is a leaking of audio recordings of meetings of right-wing forces from all over the world, from Zionist Israel, from the United States, and then also right-wing governments in Nuestra America. From Argentina, we had Milei, and we also had on these tapes the former president of Honduras, Joe, who was charged and found guilty of narco trafficking, went to prison in the United States, and then shortly afterwards, he was actually put into the presidency in Honduras in the first place through a US-backed coup. And then the Honduran people got him up out of there. Then the US government charged him with felony narco trafficking. He was convicted. He went to prison. Then a progressive government comes back into the power in Honduras, thanks again to the organization of the masses of people. Then last fall, the Trump administration pardons the convicted narco trafficker, the right-wing former president of Honduras. And then Trump, as Honduras is going to vote in their last presidential election, there was a progressive candidate who was from the Libre Party, which is a Xiomara Castro's party. And there was a right-wing candidate, Nasfura. And so Trump tweeted that if Nasfura didn't win the election, that there would be serious consequences for Honduras, and the Honduran people, having a long, long history of extremely violent US intervention, got afraid. And the right-wing candidate won. That was like direct election interference. And then a few months later, these tapes come out in which the pardoned narco trafficking right-wing former president in Honduras is engaging in discussions with Zionists, with US officials, and with Milei from Argentina, basically conspiring to attempt to destabilize progressive governments in Nuestra America, particularly Mexico and Colombia. And when I say they were it's like literally conversations of them planning out how to do this, like how to invest in media platforms that they make up to spread lies about the Claudia Sheinbaum and Petro in Honduras, talking about internal attempts to internally destabilize Colombia and Honduras, to try to isolate those governments and get them out of power and get better right-wing governments in. So they're very explicit. It's completely recorded. And it's really wild because if you watch capitalist media in the United States, they're not talking about it at all. But again, we have Israel, the Zionist entity. We have right-wing, like a deposed narco trafficking president backed by the United States. We have US officials, and then we have the right-wing president of Argentina, all conspiring on these tapes to attempt to overthrow the governments of progressive nations in Turtle Island. So it's really wild. It's really wild. But we talked about the Shield of the Americas before. We talked about this, like how the right-wing forces across the Western Hemisphere are coming together, are building an alliance, and they're going to use that reactionary alliance, that Shield of the Americas is what they're calling it, to go for Colombia, to go for Mexico. They already used it to go for Venezuela. They're currently using it to go for Cuba. And so I feel like when I explain how they're coming together, like how there's like this right-wing counter-revolution, this fascist counter-revolution consolidating in the Western Hemisphere, I sound like a crackpot, but I'm telling you, the tapes have leaked. The receipts are there to show that this is being carried out. And it's obviously not limited to the Western Hemisphere because Israel's in the meetings too. And so sometimes within the Cuba Solidarity movement, we have tunnel vision where we're like, just Cuba, only Cuba. But when we look at the tactics of the enemy, in order to actually defeat US imperialist attacks on Cuba, to defeat the blockade, we have to understand how the enemy is collaborating across borders to threaten Cuba and other progressive projects in Western America. We're saying only Cuba, only focus on Cuba. And the enemy is like, how can we build connections across borders to take Cuba out? You know what I'm saying? Like, peep the tactic, peep the tactic. So again, that article is in the chat with like the investigation, the receipts, the transcripts to check out, to see how the Zionist entity is in our hemisphere, conspiring with the United States, conspiring with fascist governments to attack progressive governments. Like, they are getting on the same page, which means that we have to as well. Our resistance must be transnational, must be across movements, not just by slapping our logo on a flyer, but by building principled people-to-people connections between movements, because that is what the right wing is doing. We cannot beat them unless we unify as well. Another example of how the right-wing puppet governments across Turtle Island, across the Western Hemisphere, are getting information to align with US imperialist attacks on progressive projects like Cuba, like Venezuela, like Nicaragua, was a recent interview that the governor of Puerto Rico gave on a podcast. And I want to play a clip from that interview. It's in Spanish, but I'll translate what she's saying afterwards. And also, you should learn how to speak Spanish. Just learn. But most of the people in this hemisphere speak Spanish. Look, all the doors will open up for you if you be learning. But don't worry, I will translate.
40 años atrás, ¿qué dijo Ronald Reagan? En aquel momento mucho más conservador que Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan dijo en aquel momento que Puerto Rico estaba listo y preparado para ser parte de los Estados Unidos y que era más beneficioso para los Estados Unidos también tener a Puerto Rico como un Estado.
Pero había una guerra fría en ese momento.
Hay una guerra fría. ¿Qué guerra tenemos ahora? Tenemos una guerra con China, tenemos una guerra con Irán, tenemos una guerra con Rusia, teníamos una guerra hasta los otros días con Venezuela y vamos a tener una con Cuba la próxima semana. Puerto Rico es clave en estos asuntos. Fuimos clave para Venezuela hace escasamente 6 meses atrás y lo vamos a hacer clave para la política pública de los Estados Unidos en Latinoamérica. Tenemos que ver lo que está pasando.
Okay, woo, that lady is ridiculous. So that was the governor of Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, who, it's very important to understand, was not chosen by the Puerto Rican people. The island of Puerto Rico, the nation of Puerto Rico, is a colony of the United States that is governed by this lady and a junta. And neither she nor the junta were selected by the people of Puerto Rico. They are puppets of Puerto Rico's colonizer, which is the US government. So in that interview, she's basically saying that the U.S. is engaged in wars all over the planet. She's like, they're at war with Iran, they're at war with China, they're at war with Russia, and next week they're going to be at war with Cuba. And so a lot of people have started talking about that interview clip because she's claimed that a U.S. military intervention against Cuba is coming in next week. And I just want to tell y'all, we should absolutely organize. Like, military intervention against Cuba is imminent. Like, that is why we have launched the International No War on Cuba campaign. That is why we are trying to organize and mobilize social justice forces across the planet to resist military intervention in Cuba. Like, be clear, like, we must oppose it. We must take action. Also, can I tell you, she wouldn't know. She wouldn't know. Like, she was clout chasing, because after she says, like, the United States is going to be attacking Cuba next week, she's like, we have to understand that Puerto Rico is key. Puerto Rico is key. Like, they used us to attack Venezuela. When they invaded Venezuela and killed 100 people in 45 minutes, we helped. And so look, Puerto Rico is key to the interests of the U.S. government in this region. And really, like, the United States needs to make Puerto Rico a state because we're so important. Girl, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. The United States' relationship with Puerto Rico is one of extraction and destruction. That is why wages on the island are stagnant. Prices of housing, of food, of healthcare are escalating. The jobs are going. Massive numbers of Puerto Rican people are leaving because the U.S. imperialism has created unlivable conditions. And rather than dealing with the day-to-day conditions of the people of Puerto Rico, the people who Puerto Rico rightfully belongs to, this puppet is occupied with selling Puerto Rico to the people colonizing it, to the people looting from it. She's saying, not only do I support that, but I want you to use us to do that to other places. Cuba has a revolutionary socialist project that puts life first. Use us to get rid of that thing. She was proud about how the U.S. used Puerto Rico to attack Venezuela. That's bananas. And the even more bananas thing is that she says in that interview that, that Puerto Rico has to become a state within the United States. Oh my God, because that is in the best interest of the United States. And can I tell you what Trump said yesterday about that? He said that Puerto Rico becoming a U.S. state would be a disaster and it would never happen. So you see this lady on a podcast all excited about Puerto Rico being used as the base of operations to recolonize the rest of the hemisphere. And the person that she's trying to suck up to, Big Daddy Trump, that is helping her exploit the Puerto Rican people, is like, no, we're not doing that. That's hilarious. Like, these puppets sell themselves so cheap and they can't even get basic respect. Basic respect. And that is, again, why, like I said in the Shield of the America show, we must unite with the revolutionary forces in Puerto Rico, the forces in Puerto Rico that are fighting for the independence of Puerto Rico from U.S. colonialism, because once the Puerto Rican people have control of their land, have control of their government, the U.S. military can no longer use that island as an oversized aircraft carrier. They can no longer use Puerto Rico as a logistical base for carrying out violent extraction and colonialism across the rest of the hemisphere. They are using Puerto Rico against the will of the Puerto Rican people. These puppets like the governor, these puppets in the junta are letting them do it. And it is only the organized masses of Puerto Rican people taking back their island that is going to stop the United States from doing that. Do not think that this puppet's gonna blink. You can see how gleeful she was about the idea of Puerto Rico being used to help attack Cuba. Girl, oh my God. So yeah, I just wanted to play that clip. The forces of counter-revolution, the right-wing and fascist forces in the Western Hemisphere are coming together to attack the progressive and anti-imperialist movement. Now, not just Cuba, not just Venezuela, not just Nicaragua, but all of us. And the Zionist entity is in the mix as well. And so we need to support people's movements against imperialism, people's movements for national liberation, people's movements for socialism in the Western Hemisphere and all over the world, because it's only the organized masses of people that is going to take these puppets out, that is going to regain control, the rightful control of how politics move in this region. Another thing that we want to check in about is we briefly mentioned in a couple of programs the news report that came out from Axios claiming that the Cuban government had obtained a number of attack drones from Russia and Iran, and we're going to use those drones to attack the United States, perhaps Key West. Like the Miami Herald has been posting like very frantic, irrational stories about the possibility of this. We already know that's nonsense. Cuba has never, ever, ever attacked the United States. Cuba has only ever acted in self-defense. And this is, again, in the face of a genocidal economic blockade, in the face of constant U.S. attempts to internally destabilize Cuba, in the face of constant U.S.-backed terrorist attacks on Cuban civilians and on Cuban government entities. And so even though Cuba is constantly attacked, they have never, ever, ever at any point initiated an attack on the United States. And so, of course, the idea that Cuba is going to use drones to attack Key West is absurd. And also, if they bought drones from Russia or anybody, they have the right to do that. Who is the U.S. to tell anybody who could be friends with anybody? Just like Maurice Bishop said, the nations of the global South have the right to define who they have relations with. And if the Cuba's largest regional neighbor is blockading it and constantly threatening to invade it, they have the right to organize to resist that. They have the right to obtain anything they need to survive, because what is being put before them is an existential threat. So Axios story about possible drone attacks on Key West, it's nonsense. It is basically like the author of that article from Axios was literally on Twitter. Like, it came out, and like the whole rest of the week, he was on Twitter fighting with Cuba solidarity activists. It was actually hilarious because he knew that the story was nonsense. He was basically Trump state media attempting to manufacture a narrative, a pretext for U.S. military intervention in Cuba by framing Cuba as a security threat to the United States. That is exactly what is happening. It's also not the first time it happened. So we want to talk about something that people have been referencing a lot, which is Operation Northwoods. So for folks that don't know, I just put it up on the screen. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Make me smaller, make this bigger. Can you see me? No. I don't know if I can make it bigger, but I'll also put in the chat. So what Operation Northwoods was a program developed by the U.S. Department of Defense and the Central Intelligence Agency to stage acts of terrorism against U.S. targets, blame them on the Cuban government, and then use that as a pretext to engage in military attacks on Cuba. And so what I have up on the screen is a leaked I guess it was like released in like a Freedom of Information Act request, but it's a memo from the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued on March 13th, 1962, discussing Operation Northwoods. Like I tell you, they never, ever, ever hide the game. Like they're always like straight up. The Mallory Memorandum says the Cuban people love Castro and their revolution too much, so we have to starve them as much as we can and make them suffer so that maybe they'll overthrow it. Like they never really hide their intentions. And so this is like them straight up saying like, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have considered the attached memorandum for the Chief of Operations Cuba Project, which responds to a request for brief but precise description of pretext, which will provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. They're like, what can we make up that could justify invading Cuba? Like that's literally what they're saying in this memo. It's 15 pages. I dropped it in the chat. Check it out for yourself. Don't just listen to me. So some of the ideas that they propose in black and white, like we have the receipts, they propose painting a civilian airplane to look like a U.S. Air Force plane to try to provoke the Cuban Air Force into shooting down a civilian plane, saying that the Cuban government attacks civilians and must be overthrown. Another idea put forward in Operation Northwoods was assassinating Cuban immigrants in the United States or sinking boats of Cuban refugees fleeing the blockade, again, blaming that on the Cuban government and using that as a reason to invade Cuba. These right-wing Cubans, the right-wing Cuban diaspora in the United States is cheering right now as the Trump administration escalates the starvation and threats against the island. And meanwhile, the US government was literally like, what if we just like killed those people and blamed it on Cuba? Like they don't give a damn. They don't give a damn. Like a puppet is like the most illogical job to have because the puppet master will literally just throw you in the trash, shoot you in the head, have ICE kidnap you and put you in a detention center. They don't give a damn about these people that are going so hard for US intervention. And they also talked about orchestrating terror attacks against US cities and blaming that on the Cuban government. So they weren't just willing to throw Cuban immigrants under the bus. They were willing to harm citizens of the United States and put that on Cuba because they were so obsessed with overthrowing the Cuban Revolution, baby. Like it's unhinged. And again, they don't try to hide it. It's in black and white. So much of it is in black and white. So when we see that Axios article about claiming that Cuba is going to attack Key West, oh my God, understand the historical context of this. Understand that this is an old tactic. Framing Cuba as a national security threat to the United States, framing Cuba as somehow threatening US interests or US citizens, and in the background, literally making shit up to justify. Like that is the context in which the Axios article should be understood. They are doing everything they can to attempt to manufacture a pretext for US military intervention in Cuba. That's why you have Marco Rubio in Miami every couple of days talking about, no, Cuba's a national security threat. Cuba's like trying to find some kind of reason to frame it that way, even though nobody is buying it. Nobody is buying it because Cuba has never attacked the United States. My God. So the strength of the Cuban Revolution is making them increasingly desperate to find like some kind of reason to intervene. And so when you read the drone article, when you see more and more claims talking about there's foreign military bases on the island, they're just making things up to justify what they've been trying to do since the victory of the Cuban Revolution, even really before that, because like we mentioned before on the show, they've been wanting to colonize Cuba like since the United States was born. You can find quotes from like John Quincy Adams talking about Cuba should be part of the United States. Like these people are obsessed with possessing that island in the same way they possess Puerto Rico. And the only thing standing in the way of that is the Cuban Revolution, is the organized Cuban people resisting this. So don't get caught slipping, don't fall for it. Also, so as like the escalation, the US imperialist escalation continues with Honduras Gate, with the Puerto Rican puppet bragging about how they were used to attack Venezuela and like celebrating to do it to Cuba as well, with the Axios drone lies, with the increasingly desperate lies from Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is trying to prove his legacy, and that man is going to be a loser for life, man. You're not going to get it. Cuba's not going to fall. Your life's work will be for nothing, you loser. They're getting increasingly desperate because the Cuban Revolution is not falling. And Cuba has remained steadfast in saying that the revolution is not on the table. Socialism is not on the table for no negotiation. They're not going to allow the United States to define how Cuban society is organized. Only the Cuban people will do that. And so they have been consistent in being steadfast in Cuba's position, while also remaining open to talks, like talks between equals with the United States. And so I want to play a clip of Cuba's foreign minister, Bruno Rodríguez Parrilla, responding to some of the lies from Marco Rubio.
The Secretary of State, he was not born in Cuba. He does not know Cuba. He knows nothing about Cuba. The Secretary of State is one of the main masterminds behind the military threat against Cuba, the energy blockade, the complete blockade on fuel supplies to Cuba. He was one of the authors of the extreme tightening of the blockade against my country. However, he lies. He lies on and on. He continuously intends to deceive the public opinion in the U.S., the U.S. Congress, and the international community. Based on what logic? What would be the common sense behind the idea that Cuba could threaten a nuclear superpower? Second, we will have to ask the Secretary of State if he has any evidence. I have heard him lying on and on regarding this issue. No political difference, no difference between two states, no consideration about the political system or the government of another country could be the reason for provoking a war or to cause a bloodbath or a humanitarian catastrophe.
Once again, that was the foreign minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodríguez Parrilla, talking about how Marco Rubio cannot stop lying, escalating desperate ass lies, attempting to frame Cuba as a national security threat to the United States, because Marco Rubio is trying to please the most unhinged possible population of right-wing Cubans concentrated in South Florida. Like, he's obsessed. He also has his own deep ties to right-wing forces, including narco-traffickers across the Western Hemisphere. We're going to do a show doing a deeper dive into Marco Rubio and how much that guy sucks. Just a huge loser, huge liar. We're going to talk about more detail about that in another program. But yeah, I just wanted to share the Cuban Commander's responses. And then the rest of the anti-imperialist forces are also still showing up for Cuba. And so the nations of CARICOM, with the exclusion of puppets in the Shield of the Americas, Trinidad and Guyana, but the rest of the nations in CARICOM released a statement this week condemning the U.S. oil blockade on Cuba, condemning the escalation of the U.S. blockade on Cuba, and condemning the threats of military escalation. Like I said, Trinidad and Guyana are led by right-wing puppets, are in the Shield of the Americas, are aligning themselves with the right-wing counter-revolution in Western America. But the rest of the nations in this hemisphere put out that statement saying that we do not support this, we condemn this. Additionally, China and Russia continue to provide both political support to the Cuban Revolution by condemning the indictment of Raúl Castro, condemning the oil blockade, and condemning the military threats, as well as continuing to send humanitarian aid. China just sent a large shipment of rice. They also have been instrumental in Cuba's rapid transition to solar power. Like, I keep seeing people saying China's not doing enough. And I'm like, do you understand that Cuba's going to get to 30% of its electricity generated by solar by 2028. Like, we're going to do that in 3 years under a blockade, and Cuba's, like, China is helping them. Like, the solar panels are coming from China. What are you doing? China's not doing enough. Like, what are you doing? Can we chill? Anyway, and then the last thing I want to talk about, actually, no, one more thing before I move to the closing clip, is in addition to the anti-imperialist forces in Nuestra America and all over the world showing up for the Cuban Revolution, condemning the U.S. escalation, we also see unfolding in Bolivia what the people led by puppet governments have to do across the Western Hemisphere, across the world, because Bolivia is led by a right-wing U.S.-backed puppet, Rodrigo Paz. Like, that is the person currently occupying the presidency of Bolivia. He is a strong U.S. ally. He is right-wing. He was at the Shield of the America summit back in March, so he's part of that project as well. But Bolivia has an extremely organized and conscious mass indigenous peoples movement. And so even though imperialism got a puppet in the presidency, the masses of people in Bolivia are like, who is this man? We do not like him. Get out of Evo's chair. And so for the past several weeks, there have been mass mobilizations, strikes, blockages of major highways that have paralyzed the nation of Bolivia, and the indigenous masses are saying, this puppet needs to go. You are not our president. We don't care what kind of crumbs you give us. Like, this week he was like, oh, I'll take half my salary. They're like, shut up, just go. We don't want you here. We don't want a puppet in our presidency. We want a president that represents the masses of the people. And so they are showing that even when imperialism manages to steal your election, manages to get a right-wing puppet in the presidency, that is not the end of the struggle. That is not the end of the struggle. The masses of people, if they are conscious and organized, can take action to bring a country to a halt and to make sure that their demands are heard and met. And that is precisely what needs to happen in Puerto Rico. And really, it's building. There is a strong anti-imperialist movement in Puerto Rico. There's a strong independence movement in Puerto Rico. Those forces are mobilizing constantly to resist the attempt to organize Puerto Rico's economy and government for extraction. And we need to see the same thing in Honduras. We need to see the same thing in Costa Rica. We need to see the same thing in Argentina, because the organized masses of people that make history, just because one puppet wins an election doesn't mean the struggle's over. Learn from Bolivia. So last thing I'll say in this segment is that, like I mentioned at the top of the show, we did see the Fox News digital report trying to scare people, trying to isolate people. We don't give a damn. One of the folks that was organizations that was specifically named was National Network on Cuba member organization Code Pink. News report said that Code Pink had been targeted with subpoenas from the Department of Justice requesting information about their participation in the Nuestra America convoy. Code Pink forces reported that they did not actually receive a subpoena. Just showing you, just because Fox News says something doesn't mean we got to do nothing. We don't got to jump. We don't have to get scared. They just be talking, just like Marco Rubio, just be talking. It doesn't mean anything. So Medea Benjamin recently sat down for an interview with Belly of the Beast, our comrades at a Cuba Solidarity Media platform. And so I want to play a part of that interview with Medea's response to the Fox News digital report.
Those people who think that we are that easily intimidated, they don't know Code Pink, but they will find out how determined we are.
Hi, I'm Liz.
Fox News recently reported on an investigation by the U.S. Treasury Department, specifically the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. According to the report, you and others were cited in connection with your participation in the Nuestra America humanitarian convoy to Cuba in March 2026. Is it true?
It's not a subpoena, it's a letter asking for information about the trip, what we did, what flight we took, what aid we took with us, what did we do while we were there, those kinds of things.
Where they're trying to get with that asking?
It's a form of intimidation to try to get people who travel to Cuba to be afraid that the government's going to go after them. It's not a tactic that works with Code Pink because we're certainly not afraid of our government. We're afraid of our government's policies, like the government policy towards Cuba and what it's doing to the Cuban people. That's what we're afraid of.
Have you or Code Pink violated any U.S. laws in your visits to Cuba?
We didn't violate the law. In fact, we followed the letter of the law. We did not want to stay in a fancy hotel in Havana. We would much prefer to stay in a very simple hotel, but we weren't allowed to by the U.S. government. You know, they have a list of hundreds of hotels we're not allowed to stay in, and only a handful that are foreign-owned. In this case, we stayed in a Spanish-owned hotel. We also came under the category of aid to the Cuban people, and we brought humanitarian aid. We also did not go to the beach. We were not tourists. We spent our time in educational activities, learning about the situation in Cuba. So we certainly are in compliance with the law. That's why we feel that this request for information is really just a form of intimidation. We didn't try to hide that we were going. On the contrary, we encourage people to speak out, to use their social media. It's interesting that Hassan Piker, who has millions of viewers and lots of them young people, have really been educated for the first time about what the U.S. government is doing in Cuba. And I think it's the kind of social media reach that we had on that trip that is something that irritated a lot of the members of Congress and pushed them to push the Treasury Department to do something.
How does Code Pink plan?
All right, I encourage folks to watch that full video, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for the next segment of the show. Once again, that was Comrade Medea Benjamin from NNOC member organization Code Pink, talking about the Fox News digital report, talking about the Nuestra America convoy, which was a legal and licensed trip to Cuba, bringing aid to Cuba because of the escalation of the genocidal U.S. blockade. So you can see that full interview on the Belly of the Beast YouTube channel. But now I'm going to stop talking and bring back my comrade Ermia, as well as a special guest. We have with us Comrade Mosiah, also from the NNOC. Take it away, comrade.
Well, hey, comrades, thank you, and we're glad to be back. Thank you, Comrade Onye, for that incredible geopolitical update. Welcome, Comrade Mosiah. How are you?
I'm cool. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. I don't know if you've heard, it's my birthday. I'm feeling very old today, but
Happy birthday, my love. Oh no, we'll talk about that off camera. I was gonna say, how old are you? Would that be terrible?
26. I already announced it. So
all right, child. All right. That's what's up. Happy birthday, man.
Thank you. So Mosiah, before we get into this interview, I want to remind everyone that we are having two incredible actions that are coming up. We are having the International Day of Action, which is on June 3rd. We're hosting it on Comandante Raúl Castro's birthday because he is, let's not forget, indicted by a sham trial held by the murderous, genocidal United States. And we will be hosting actions in every single city this day. Let's please get out into the streets for Cuba. Let's get out into the streets in support of Comandante Raúl Castro. If you are interested in hosting an event, please reach out to the National Network on Cuba immediately. We will help with promoting your event, getting your event on our socials, our website, our newsletter, and providing any other resources that we can. Also, another event that we have coming up is our Week of Action, No War on Cuba. We will be hosting No War on Cuba events from June 28th until July 4th. We need all hands on deck for this Week of Action. We need people hosting film screenings, demonstrations, panels, and any other type of solidarity event. Our last Week of Action was incredibly successful. Y'all engaged from every corner of this country, the East Coast, South, North, West Coast. So we are asking again for everyone to put their efforts together to call for no war on Cuba. Cuba is needing our solidarity more than ever at this time. And again, if you're wanting to host an action during this week, reach out to us. Let us know how we can help with your events, and please get them registered with us. So, Comrade Messiah, back to you. You have just returned from Cuba as a coordinator on the 2026 May Day Brigade. First of all, before we get into the questions, just tell us how you're feeling being fresh off the island.
Yeah, I mean, it's always so jarring to return back to this place after going to, the only liberated territory on this side of the planet, right? But then you settle into your community, you settle into your work, into your struggle, and you step down. So I'm trying to, lay low, play slow, but keep moving steady. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right. So, Messiah, talk to us about the importance of the May Day Brigade. The May Day Brigade has been going on for, I think people don't know, almost 20 years now. Next year, it'll be 20 years. And we want to kind of hear about, what is the importance of U.S. movements showing solidarity to Cuba, visiting the island, being a part of the May Day Brigade at this moment in particular?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the May Day Brigade, both our U.S. org and that couple week-long experience in general is an international ground, right? It's for coordinated solidarity with revolutionary Cuba in particular, but it's against imperialism and U.S. imperialism in particular. I mean, in principle, right? So we're moving from recognizing that we have internationally coordinated enemies, right? That they're in Washington, they're in Tel Aviv, they're in Dubai, right? They're across Europe, and they're embedded into the national projects and governments of our world, right? And forces of capitalism and imperialism. And they're telling us that Cuba is next, right? As Onya has clearly painted for us, right? There are destroyers on the way to the island. And every day that man releases a new, pedophilic coded threat to take Cuba, or there's some new propaganda piece to manufacture war, or there's some like violent legal measure that deepens the hybrid war in preparation for the military aggression, right? So we know that there's imminent war coming for Cuba, and we know that we have to be internationally coordinated for this movement and other movements, right? For the May Day Brigade, I think that solidarity is not a sentiment for us, right? We locate our freedom here with our family's freedom on the island, right? We pay back their love with love, like the title of the damn podcast, Revolution Within a Revolution, right? We understand where we are, right? So, and it's important that we are in solidarity with Cuba in this urgent moment because of the imminent war, but we also know that in a larger sense that Cuba is a front, right? Cuba is a front for anti-colonialism and humanity, right? It is a mirror for Africans, Asians, indigenous people, Latino people, right? That you can organize and create this vibrant human-centered society, right under the nose of the U.S., right? So we all see ourselves in that little island that calls itself African, man. So we're calling for a No War on Cuba campaign in this regard, and we're charged with cultivating the public opinion and the material support networks to enforce that demand of no war.
That's right. That's right. And like you said, Cuba serves as a front for all of our struggles, right? It serves as a point of inspiration for revolutionary people, people of consciousness, progressive people, oppressed people all over the globe. So, talk to us a little bit more about the collective organizing that takes place as a part of the May Day Brigade. Where in the US, as well as other parts of the world, are activists coming from? And how many are already engaged in Cuba solidarity efforts?
Yeah, so, Leah, like I mentioned, it's an international ground, right? So I think this year there were about 22 to 26 countries. At my height, there were like 57 countries on one of the May Day Brigades that I went to, right? So it's an international effort from people from Mexico to Japan to Canada, to Germany, to Brazil, to the Bahamas. And these are people who coalesce on Cuba, like I said, in an imperialist principle, right? And and nationally for the US, we are, I would say, like a national organization of smaller formations, right? So it's a sort of decentralized but heavily coordinated effort, right? So we are everywhere from Cali to Carolina, right? So for instance, our last caravan campaign activated the May Day Brigade across the East Coast. And we quite literally took a caravan down the whole East Coast, passing through cities, Boston, from Boston over to Detroit, all the way down, right? So we do this sort of work nationally, and we also are part of an international solidarity campaign or solidarity movement for Cuba, right? And we in the US typically organize around like 3 pillars. This is like media, so narrative intervention or telling the truth about Cuba, material support, like sending medicine and solar equipment to ease the effects of the genocidal blockade, and things like political education that offer a sort of deeper engagement and cultivation of consciousness.
That's right. That's right. And I think a lot of people don't really realize the scope of the May Day Brigade. I mean, it's folks from everywhere, right? We're talking about Australia, we're talking about Ireland, we're talking about Africa, we're talking about, I mean, it is, I think, one of the biggest, most politically developing experiences being a part of the May Day Brigade is witnessing how many people across the world are engaged in Cuba solidarity, but also how they recognize anti-imperialism as a broader part of their politics, a broader part of their struggle, right? I mean, these are people who have successfully won their struggles, right? We're talking about people who are visiting from South Africa, who are visiting from Vietnam, who are visiting from so many different fronts of struggle, who see Cuba, which is in the Western Hemisphere, as a point of inspiration. And so I think that tells us a lot. That tells us a lot for those of us who are doing solidarity around the Cuban Revolutionary Project. So, Isaiah, tell me, what was the energy during this year's May Day festivities like, especially considering the amped up repression and attacks against Cuba at this moment?
Yeah. In 3 words, it was defiant, it was unifying, and it was critical. It felt very critical, man. Like this was my 3rd May Day parade, right? So I'm talking about the parade, but you asked about the festivities, but I'm gonna zoom in to the actual marching. I think it was very fitting that we marched alongside the Cubans this year, right? We mixed the rumba with the Yankee go home chants, and we were saying we believe that we will win.
That's right.
You know, as the batas and the djembes were playing, right? The people of the world next to the Cuban workers and children and elders chanting past that US embassy. It was important. It was an important display of the international tide and the international anti-colonial fervor that is building in the world, right? To say something like what Trump would say, it was the biggest parade. It was the biggest parade I've ever seen, right? Like, but not actually, right? We're not romanticizing this, but this is simply a revolutionary people, right? A pueblo, a revolucionario, right? They've lived under U.S. war for 60 years. This is entering the 70th soon. Right, so this is not some like sort of flat resilience that we were seeing at the parade, but it's like a revolutionary optimism from such a highly organized society, right? They are prepared to defend their homeland, right? I promise you. And that energy was present in the parade and all the festivities we saw both in this brigade as well as the other brigades, right? When we sat through retirement ceremony, when they brought us in and we sat through retirement ceremonies, or we visited the schools, hospitals, where the revolution is being carried and actually playing out, right?
That's right. That's right. Mosiah, do you know how to say the Yankee go home chant? Do you know the Spanish?
I'm pretty sure it's yo solo sé 6 palabras en inglés.
And
then
then
we say,
Yankee, go home. Yankee, go home. So for folks who don't know, this chant came out of the Puerto Rican struggle, right? Comrade Onier grounded us, told us the Puerto Rican people are still fighting for their national liberation. And this chant kind of is like, it became our brigade chant this year, right? Because I was the one who pushed it. I was like, this is my favorite chant. We have to keep doing it.
Wonderful.
And it was just, It's just such a good chant. And what it translates to in English is the only three words that we know in English are Yankee, go home, Yankee, go home. And we were just like saying that right alongside the Cuban people, alongside our Puerto Rican comrades. And it was so beautiful. And that chant just like lives rent free in my head. Yankees go home. Exactly. It's like,
And Ermia, I'll tell you one thing, a little embarrassing. I mess up that chant so often. Sometimes I say tres and I say seis.
oh my
But when I say
God.
seis, I had a Mexican comrade ask me, she said, why do y'all say seis? Like I'm trying to, is it Yankee go? And I was like, no, I think it's seis because we say it twice. But really, I mess it up. But
Yes.
yes, it's tres.
It's better than me. I don't know how to, I only know how to say the yo solo cinco part. And then the rest, I'm just like, ugh. Miladies is one of our comrades from the Puerto Rican struggle. Miladies, she's still training me through it. So
Yes, man, we'll get
inshallah, I
there.
will get it.
Yes,
Yeah.
inshallah, we'll walk there together.
So, compa, you told us a little bit about the places, the centers, the hospitals that y'all visited, that we
Mhm.
visited on the May Day Brigade.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit more about these places. What kind of work are they engaged in, and how does it speak to the power of Cuban socialism?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, like as I mentioned, the sites, I forget who says it, but they say the sacred sites of the Cuban Revolution, the schools, the hospitals, the places where the community gets their care and their things for free, is where the revolution is carried out, right? So we visited like co-ops owned by multiple growers who shared tools and equipment and plans, right, under blockade, and land, right, in order to feed their communities, right? They're guided by these sorts of national goals, these national projects like food sovereignty or sustainable agriculture, right? We visited a maternal home for at-risk pregnancies, and of course, the home was free of charge, right? And the care is holistic, comprehensive, right? We visited a mini community of schools called Liberty City, right? And in the same vein, there's this place where for free you can travel through all the stages of education and care that you would need to, from the baby to the post grad, right? We visited a revolutionary youth Afro-feminist collective, right? They're using like Afro-Cuban culture as a medium for larger intervention work on behalf of women and girls, right? So again, and these are just a few. These are just a few. This is just a couple of hours out of some of these days, right? And each of these projects is showing us that the Cuban socialism has essential grassroots support, right? That the revolution is carried out on the ground every day that a doctor gives care for free, or that little girls are continuing the work of the revolution by intervening in their community and embracing their culture, right? So these were the sorts of things that Cubans are doing. They're doing it right now, and they're going to be doing it tomorrow, right? So, and we recognize that, and this is part of what it means to defend the revolution, right? That's part of what it means is to continue to struggle in your community, in your revolutionary organized community, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think people sometimes can't grasp just how much the Cuban Revolutionary Project has truly put its people at the center of its project, right? I mean, you've mentioned the maternal health center that we visited. I think what is incredible about what we learned there is that not only does this center exist for pregnant women to go to receive comprehensive care, but the Cuban political system has made it so pregnant women are fully taken care of in all aspects of life when they bring a child into this world. Maternity leave in Cuba is a year long, and it starts 3 months before a woman gives birth to their child. And if they need for it to be longer, they can push it beyond that.
Exactly.
And it's not half paid leave or, or paid just for 2 weeks. It is full paid leave that entire time. They get their 100% salary the entire time they're on maternity health leave. And so I think what people may not realize about the May Day Brigade is that when we go there, we are learning from the Cuban people, absolutely, but it's an exchange. right? And the Cuban people also learn from us, because we go there and we tell them, well, holy hell, we didn't even know that these are things we could demand, right? We're here asking for like maybe a month of maternity health leave, right? Like we did not know that this world could exist where it could be a year-long and fully paid leave. Like, the Cuban people are inspiring us, but we're also telling them, look, y'all are incredible, y'all are amazing, but we have work to do when we get back home, because this is not even something that we are close to achieving quite yet in the American empire. So, you know, on that trend of like the reaction to what people hear when they go there, what were some of the conversations, the reactions that you heard from first-time new brigadistas visiting Cuba as their first trip? How did they express how Cuba developed their political consciousness?
Through tears and more tears. Right, lots of tears.
Of crying.
Yeah, and crying, and jokes right in the middle of the crying, right? But they speak a lot about the new human, right? That the revolution waters, that it gives ground to, right? The new person that springs from liberation and socialism, right? That what happens when you reorganize your relationship to one another and the land and your labor on that land, right? I think that no matter where you are politically, Cuba moves you and forces you into certain realities and contradictions, right? So the new first-time brigadistas, they stand on what I keep calling the only liberated territory on this side of the planet. And they have to contend with like a sliver of both the contradictions and the continuation of that revolution that's changing everything that needs to be changed, and the sliver of the aggression and strangulation that the US imposes on the entire global South, right? So they get that. And for a lot of people, it's their first access to reality in the global South, not a vacation, not a resort, but reality. And of course, it's like Cuba is both of the third world, but it's also like beyond the first world, right? Because it's like an advanced, one of the most advanced societies on the side of the planet, right? So the brigadistas, they like politically grow, and they witness this complexity of the triumphs of the revolution in progress, and the hybrid war against the revolution, all of it, right? They talk about how they see in Cuba like revolutionary feelings and theory materialize, right? So many of them say that it's not in a book anymore, right? It's not in my head or my heart anymore, right? They see that love can be an action on the national scale, on the communal scale, right? And like you said, they see that we can rearrange reality with humanity and solidarity at the center, right? So a socialism that is scientific and sensual and all those things wrapped up, right? So it moves them no matter where they are politically. It moves them.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Beautifully put. So, Comrade Messiah, no war on Cuba, no war on Cuba, no war on Cuba.
Yes.
That is our resolve. That is our strategy. That is our demand as a movement.
Yes, Naya.
What are the next steps in the No War on Cuba campaign? How can people join the work and build the movement in support of Cuba?
For sure. What's next is more international coordination and escalation as our enemy escalates, right? We know that we have a day, like you mentioned, we have a day of action on Wednesday, June 3rd, right? And we have a planned week of action, June 28th to July 4th. And we are basically, we are motivating people to publicly oppose escalation towards war against Cuba, right? We're asking them to refuse the financial, political, and military support networks for U.S. aggression, right? We're giving them tools to do so and plans to do so, right? We're asking them to organize coordinated actions, to come to our political educations, then build their own, to do these sorts of interventions, right? Because we, like I said, we know that Cuba is next, right? The material demands of the campaign are calling for no war against Cuba, We're calling for like no financial or political support for U.S.-led aggressions, and of course the immediate end of the genocidal blockade. And as the May Day Brigade, we're creating the infrastructure for that work to be carried out on the local, national, and with international coordination, right? So to get involved, you can come to the day of action next week in a city near you, because they're going to be popping off in every city, right? You can join an Action for Cuba committee that likely exists near you, or you can start your own and tap into one of the working groups we talked about earlier, the media, the material aid, the political education, right? You can do intervention with workers in your community, or workers that you are employed with in our crazy ass war-driven society, right? You can politicize your community with stickerings and screenings and cultural events that motivate public opinion towards internationalism and defense of Cuba, right? There's so much you can do at this time, right? And we're creating the infrastructure and the organizational direction so that people can plug into that work.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So you heard it from Comrade Mosiah. Plug in, get into the streets for Cuba. And thank you, Comrade Mosiah, for joining us on Revolution Within the Revolution. Inshallah, we get you back on the show. Yeah. And Viva Cuba. We're going to win.
Cuba.
I believe it with all of our hearts. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to say bye to Comrade Mosiah now. Thank you again for joining us. And moving along to the next segment, I want to remind everyone that the National Network on Cuba's spring meeting is happening tomorrow. It's happening June 30th. And this is an incredibly important meeting where numerous amendments to our bylaws are being introduced. These are amendments that, were introduced and created and drafted through constant dialogue, constant struggle. And we are finally going to have a vote on them at tomorrow's meeting. You can still register. Registration is still opened. We are going to put the link in the bio to register, but please do so as soon as possible. We want to get everyone accounted for, and we will see everyone there tomorrow. And before tomorrow's meeting, what we actually wanted to do was provide a breakdown of some of the amendments that were introduced and are going to be presented at our collective meeting tomorrow. So to go over some of them, Article 1, Section 5, subsection E. This section now explicitly references the so-called state sponsor of terrorism list. The sham list that Cuba has been put on by the United States of America, which is the actual #1 terrorist state in the world. The amendment appears intended to clarify or formalize the organization's position regarding states designated under that framework. So we're providing more political clarity here in this section. Article 2 on membership. Article 2 was revised to strengthen support for individual membership and democratic participation within the organization. The updated language emphasizes that individual members are expected to actively contribute to the political life, organizing work, and development of the organization, rather than serving only in a consultative role. The previous associate membership category has been replaced with individual membership, signaling a shift toward fuller inclusion of our network's members. Individual members are now guaranteed participation in discussions and decision-making spaces, while their votes will continue to be recorded separately from organizational member votes. The revised article also commits the organization to regularly evaluating ways to deepen democratic inclusion for individual members overall. And overall, the article adopts stronger and clearer language, promoting democratic participation, organizational engagement, and member accountability to being engaged in the work. Now going over Article 4, which is on leadership structure. This article was updated to create more consistent terminology and organizational clarity regarding leadership roles. The amendments standardized references to the treasurer as a part of the executive committee and to clarify the structure and relationship between co-chairs and leadership coordinators. So Article 4 is just strengthening our leadership. It's strengthening the capacity, the terminology of our leadership, as well as what it means to be a treasurer of this organization. Moving on to Article 5, which is on executive committee selection process. The amendment changes how executive committee appointments are made. Rather than appointments being controlled directly by co-chairs, the revised language shifts towards a more democratic, member-based selection process, making our executive committee more democratically elected. Moving on to Article 6, which is the resignations and reporting responsibilities. In this article, there was additional language that was added regarding resignations and leadership accountability. The revised article strengthens expectations around reporting duties and communication responsibilities to members overall to ensure that there is streamlined communication from the top down in all aspects of the network. Now going over the Article 8 task force. So Article 8 has been renamed task forces, removing the prior language of action committees. The reason we did this is that treating ACCs as a separate or independent structure was no longer seen as organizationally coherent, since ACC participants would simply function as regular dues-paying members within the broader organization. The previous language also mixed together questions of working groups and membership structure in ways that created confusion. So the revised framework instead focuses on task forces and working groups while still encouraging local formations, whether those formations are called ACCs or something else, to essentially organize as member groups within the broader organization. And additionally, wrapping up this article, additionally, the resolutions task force now explicitly includes advocacy work, and task forces are guaranteed direct support from the executive committee. Now we want to go over Article 9, which is on accountability and conduct. The final revision substantially changes the organization's accountability framework from the previous zero tolerance approach to a new approach centered on transformative justice models. The revised language explicitly situates harmful behavior within broader systems such as capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and acknowledges that participants are shaped by those systems because they live in this backward society. The policy shift emphasizes away from punishment and toward political transformation, healing, and accountability. Under this new framework, consequences are graduated and may include facilitated conversations, political education, or temporary suspension of members, while expulsion is reserved as a very last resort. This article also emphasizes addressing root causes of harm, affirming the possibility of personal and collective change, and revisiting the policy as the organization develops. And then additionally, it replaces the term classism in our bylaws with class oppression, aligning the article more explicitly with socialist political movements and ties internal accountability practices to the broader goal of building a principled anti-imperialist movement. So comrades, taking a beat, I now want to talk on the importance of these amendments of Article 9 and why these shifts must transpire. Comrades, we are living in a time where reactionary, backwards ideas have polluted all aspects of American society. We know this. It is no secret that our enemies, the enemies of working class and oppressed people, have a sophisticated propaganda machine meant to normalize their white supremacist, cis heteropatriarchal, class oppressive ideas. And in order for us to be politically sober, we have to be entirely aware of the fact that these ideas did not emerge organically from our people. right? The ruling class is capitalist. The ruling class is backwards. And so too are the ideas that dominate this society. Now, we can recognize this all day long, but more importantly, we have to be willing to struggle against this in the battle of ideas. And the starting point is our own organizations. How are we going to wage struggle against the highly developed, highly resourced, and highly organized American empire when we can't even get rid of the ideas in our own organization oppressing its primary victims? Those victims being racially and gender oppressed people, poor people, people who don't come from the academy, and people who come from the fight in the streets. Without these people, we have no revolutionary struggle. The battle of ideas is as real as every aspect of our material conditions, as every aspect of our oppression. And this was recognized by Che, this was recognized by Mao, this was recognized by Iranian revolutionaries. This was recognized by the Vietnamese fighters. When the Cuban Revolution won, every cadre's immediate task was going to every corner of Cuba and teaching and dialoguing with the masses of Cubans. So we have to be willing to hold up the revolutionary tradition of moving ourselves and our world forward. And we have to be patient, right? A huge part of this change is about transformative justice, not as a little buzzword, but it means being patient with our people, believing in our people, and understanding that our duty as organizers, as revolutionaries, as people of consciousness, is about being willing to be in dialogue with the people. Because let me tell you, from the masses to the masses, our girl Mao Zedong said that. So without the people, we are just a fringe social club rather than a real, developed, disciplined movement. And any serious organization, which the Cuba Solidarity Movement is a prime example of, and so is the National Network on Cuba, is willing to transform our comrades and consistently develop them, not just push them to the side and get rid of them. Comrades, this is what is going to lead us to victory. I have absolutely no doubt. And now getting off my podium and wrapping up with Articles 10 and 14. Articles 10 and 14 add additional clarifying language that was added throughout to improve precision, consistency, and organizational clarity. So that one's a little bit more administrative than the last, but you know, still important. And now, comrades, wrapping up today's show, please, please, please join us next week as we continue to talk about updates from the May Day Brigade 2026. We are going to continue about more updates on our No War on Cuba campaign, and we want to reiterate, no war on Cuba, no war on Cuba, no war on Cuba. Please like, subscribe, and ensure you are sharing Revolution within the Revolution to never miss an episode of our show. And we also want to end off by sharing the Centennial of Fidel Brigade's fundraiser. Please, please, please help us build these funds to take people to the island, to bring people to Cuba, and to help develop our work. Comrades, we love you. Viva Cuba, and we will see you next week.
Eran las 3 de la mañana, 3 de enero en el calendario. Caracas dormía tranquila bajo su manto diario, pero el cielo no trajo sol, trajo un ruido de metal. Y en Fuerte Tiuna se rompió el silencio habitual. No fueron truenos de lluvia, fueron botas extranjeras que cruzaron sin permiso nuestras líneas y fronteras. La noticia corre como pólvora, la pantalla se congela. Se han llevado al presidente, hay fuego en Venezuela. Liberen a Nicolás, grita una parte del mapa. Mientras la garra del norte su sentencia destapa. Dicen que va hacia el norte sobre el mar prisionero, en las entrañas de acero de un buque extranjero. Que el mundo se detenga, que nadie quede mudo. Hoy la historia se parte. Liberen a Maduro. Hoy en Moscú escuchas el eco en el Caribe. Si cae un socio, el equilibrio no sobrevive. Pekín levanta la vista, el dragón debe mirar que las flotas del imperio han vuelto a navegar. Hermano en La Habana, sandinista en Nicaragua, saben que esta misma lluvia mañana será su agua. Si hoy tocan a uno y lo sacan de su cama, mañana su justicia incendiará toda la rama. Dicen que el Iwo Jima navega con la presa, que van rumbo a Nueva York a servirlo en la mesa. Trump firma la orden, Petro mira con espanto. ¿Es justicia o es venganza lo que cubre con su manto? Las bombas en la Carlota dejaron su marca en el suelo. Un pájaro de hierro se lo llevó en pleno vuelo. Para el que celebra en Miami, para el que llora en el barrio, esto no es solo un hombre, es un cambio de escenario. La soberanía sangra cuando el juez es el verdugo y la libertad no nace bajo la sombra del yugo. Venezolano, despierta, sea cual sea tu color. Hoy tu tierra fue pisada por la bota del invasor. El mundo aguanta la respiración, la moneda está en el aire. Nadie sabe el costo, nadie sabe el desaire. Desde el sur hasta el oriente, el mensaje es duro. Me respetan a los pueblos, me liberen a Maduro. Me respetan a los pueblos, me liberen a Maduro.